Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. And I'd like to start today's show with a trailer from a documentary called Pursuit of Truth: Adult Survivors of Child Sexual Abuse Seeking Justice.
Karina Guzman was just 9 years old when her uncle Jose Zarate began molesting her. She kept that secret for years.
My abuse began when I was between 8 and 9 years old. It went on for about 4 years. I was very emotionally removed from my family because my abuser happened to be an uncle.
I hired the nanny, and I wasn't protecting my kid.
Lauren Book tells a judge how her nanny, Waldina Flores, changed her life when she sexually abused her since she was 12 years old.
There isn't other people, there aren't witnesses. This is the crime that always takes place in secret.
Right now, our legal system is operating in a way that prefers the predator, protects the predator, and keeps the victims out of court.
The response was so protective of the perpetrator, and it was so dismissive of the damage to a human life. And after the church's response, I sought out an attorney.
When y'all look at a sexual abuse victim, look at them in their eyes and ask me if you still see the same person that you saw 2-3 years ago. They're not the same. They don't think the same. They don't look the same. They don't love the same.
The period that happened, you simply had no control over one of the most intimate aspects of your life.
Often, all we have is the victim's account of what happened. And we have to champion that. We have to go and advocate on behalf of that victim.
When I asked him why he did it, he replied, it was because of the stresses of life.
Every survivor I know that's done it has come out on the other side stronger, more articulate, more beautiful, more of an incredible human being whose soul has been tested and who has come out the other side heroes.
You know, a victim has to wonder, is it worth it? And what we really need is for victims to understand that it's always worth it, because having voice matters, being heard matters, truth matters.
Miss Flores, I hope you are haunted for the rest of your life. You raped me. You beat me.
I cannot make you admit to what you've done to me or even feel remorse that you've done it, but I can make sure that my family knows what you've done so that you never get the opportunity to hurt another child as you did to me.
The whole time was really a message to the person who abused me. You silenced me once, but hear my voice now.
Seeking that truth is the healing journey.
It was about fighting to do what was right. You know, because of your determination, that person will not be able to harm another kid.
So that even just that trailer is extremely compelling and riveting. I'd like to now introduce my two guests for today. Valerie Gibson is the mother of a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. She's also the executive producer and co-producer of this film. She is the founder and CEO of the Vertigo Charitable Foundation, or VCF, whose mission it is to help reform the legal system's response to survivor cases. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you.
So my other guest is Neil Jaffee, and Neil is co-producer of the film and is VCF's legal counsel. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you, Natasha.
So one of the worst things we can do as a society, I think, is to turn a soul-searing crime into something commonplace or old news. And this subject is clearly never old news. And additionally, it seems we are quite unaware of how few of these crimes are brought to justice and how extremely challenging the process is if they are brought into the legal system. So Valerie, let's start with you. Your son was sexually abused as a child, and you didn't find out until he was a young adult. Is that correct?
That is correct. My son disclosed to me when he was a senior at college, and he was 21 years old at the time, and that was the first time I had become aware that a family member had abused him from the ages of 7 to 11.
You know, as a mother, I mean, it's just, I want to collapse and bend over, you know, hearing that, what that must have been like for you. And and him and everybody else involved in your lives, because life was never the same. And then you decided to make this documentary. Is that correct?
Correct. I made that documentary based on my experience going through the legal system. When my son first reported to me that he had been abused, he called me, and he didn't tell me that directly. It took him about 45 minutes in a phone conversation to get it all out. And like I said, I had absolutely no idea. I was floored. And like anything else, any other crime, you say something happened to my child, somebody was abused, you go to the police. And that's, what we did. Shortly thereafter, we went to Montgomery County, Maryland Police Station and reported the crime. And after we reported the crime, I began to feel, and my son also began to feel, like it was on deaf ears and that no one really was going to do anything about it. That compelled me to find out why no one was taking responsibility or the police department was not interested in these cases. So that's really what led me to make the documentary, because I felt like we weren't the only family that this had happened to, and there had to be a better way.
It's just, again, mind-boggling and unfathomable, because not only has a crime been committed, but the years of, living with that, and then when you report it, it's treated not victim-friendly.
Correct.
So, Neil, I'm going to ask you, from a legal point of view, how many of these cases do get into the courts finally, and what's the success rate?
Well, those are very difficult questions to answer, Natasha, because statistics are not available for the number of cases that actually reach the legal system and the number of cases that result in a conviction if they're criminal cases. One of the best practices that we are advocating for is the transparency of those types of statistics, which should be kept by law enforcement and by prosecutors' offices. As best we can tell from our research and contacting various offices, many offices don't even keep these kinds of statistics, and those that do keep them private. So we believe it's important for the public to know how many cases are actually being reported to the police, what percentage of those cases move on from the police to prosecution, and what percentage of cases actually result in convictions and incarceration of perpetrators. There is no way to tell right now.
Which is pretty shocking. So I'm going to get back to you, Valerie. So, this documentary is really, it shows how challenging it is for the victims to move into the courts, and how daunting the questioning is, and the challenges that they're put under. What for you was the biggest challenge, and what for you is the main thing that you would, or main one or two things that you would want changed?
Well, the entire system is challenging and re-traumatizing. And I think for me, it was about saving my son. And like any survivor that has kept a secret for a long time, they are fragile, and they needed to be treated with respect, with the knowledge that they are believed, and with support of the legal system. And it just doesn't happen. None of that happens. And I think what I want most of all for people to know, law enforcement, when the first reporters get it wrong, the case is never going to go anywhere, because the survivor is never going to trust that system again. And, I think the takeaway is that you need to be supported. You need to minimize the re-traumatization. They need to know what they're in for, because if you're not strong and you have no support system, you're never going to make it through that system. And
so, I'm going to interrupt you here because clearly there are problems. But in order to, make it real, so what were some of the things, the failures along the way? So you report it. Did they treat it dismissively? Did they treat him dismissively? Did they do any follow-up? Did they, and again, in the documentary, you start to see that this is a crime where there were no witnesses. And so, because there are no witnesses, I'm assuming law enforcement discourages people from pursuing it because it's a hard case to prove. Is this accurate? Or again, what happened along the way that really was most distressing?
I think the most distressing thing was it was, like you said, treated as a dismissive case. It happened a long time ago. You're an outstanding citizen. Your perpetrator is an outstanding citizen, so you should get on with your lives. And I think that was the most dismissive thing a judge could say, a lawyer could say, is to get on with your lives.
So here's a victim, finally, and from everything I've read and seen, a lot of those memories don't even surface for a long time. And then they surface in bits and pieces. And then there's the whole shame aspect and who do I tell and who will believe and all of that. And then they finally voice what happened, and it's treated like get over it.
Exactly.
It's in the past.
Correct.
So then what has you come back and say, no, I'm not going to be dismissed?
That takes a tremendous amount of courage to come back, and it takes a tremendous amount of courage to even come forward. And I think no one ever puts those two things together, how much courage it ever took to come forward to just say it happened. And I think for me, when I saw that happening in our situation, I went to other places. I said, the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that this, as best I can, make sure that this doesn't happen to any other families. And so I did research again, and I found other police departments that had, quote, sexual assault units. And the first place I went was Philadelphia and talked to their sex crime unit. And they told me in our case, and I gave them the same information that I had given the detectives, or my son had given the detectives in Maryland. And they said, we absolutely would have prosecuted this case. We would have stood with your son. We would not have let him recant. We would have supported him and gone forward with it. And I said, wow, this is really interesting. It's only who you report to, how relevant your case is.
Wow, that's really compelling.
That was so eye-opening. It's just, okay, if I told Detective A, there's nothing going to be done. If I told Detective B, okay, here we go. I will support you. I will do, everything necessary to bring this case forward.
So for me, again, I'm always looking for our viewing audience. That's a big clue. So that if you report it to someone who is dismissive, you look for somebody else to report it to. So Neil, I'm going to ask you, what's the biggest challenge for you? Again, in the documentary, they talk about, these people who have to relive and relive and relive, and they're badgered and questioned and made to divulge extraordinarily terrible details. How do you prepare your clients, and what's the biggest challenge for you?
Well, the biggest challenge, Natasha, is to and then really the goal of litigation in these survivor cases is to make the litigation part of the survivor's recovery, to empower the survivor to be able to confront his or her perpetrator in the legal system and to be given an opportunity to tell his or her story in public, to explain really what happened to them. And the challenge from the lawyer's perspective is preparing the survivor for that type of confrontation, because the criminal justice system is an adversary system, as we know. And the credibility of the survivor is going to be challenged time and again by the defense lawyer, the lawyer defending the perpetrator, in some ways by the jury, in some ways by the judge. So preparing the survivor by advising the survivor and informing the survivor what is going to happen in the legal process at every stage. It's very powerful for lawyers to know what to expect, but it's surprising how many lawyers don't inform their clients of what's going to come next. Preparing the survivor by reviewing the evidence in the case, by doing mock examinations and cross-examinations, by going into the courtroom and the courthouse in advance so the survivor knows what he or she is going to be facing, and by educating everybody in the system as to what the survivor is actually going through, what a trauma survivor has to undergo to go through the legal system and arise to all the challenges that he or she is going to face.
Well, thank you, because that's another extremely important thing for anyone who's watching who might be in this situation to understand and to know that this is what should happen, that you want to find someone who's going to work with you in a supportive but very preparatory way, so that you don't walk in and are slammed with really unexpected things that can fell you within a minute.
Right. If I might jump in,
yes,
again, Natasha, and just follow up quickly, because I also meant to say what is essential is that the survivor has therapy before, during, and after the litigation. It's crucial. And in fact, some lawyers won't represent survivors in civil cases until they know from a therapist that a survivor is competent and psychologically ready to undergo all of the difficulties that the legal system is going to present.
Yeah, that's really important. So Valerie, you know, your son's case was just recently resolved. One of the things from our conversation, I'm assuming that, but one of the things that in the documentary, which we will be running on this station, that it's exactly what you pointed to, Neil. It was very empowering for them. As grueling as it was, finally taking that step was empowering and healing in some way. So Valerie, would you say that that's the case with your son, or was it resolved in a very unsatisfactory way?
I think, you know, my conversations with my son, he started therapy shortly after his disclosure, and he stayed in therapy continuously up and past the trial date. We never actually got to trial, and as a matter of fact, I'm making a follow-up documentary to Pursuit of Truth, just to say the things that happen off the record that people are not aware of. And those are a lot of things that happened in our case, things that weren't transparent, and we weren't aware of them until afterwards. So our case was over because the judge said it was over. And that's all after
Wow.
4 years, the judge told us that, we should get on with our lives, and pretty much that it was over. And the constituents in New Jersey did not want to pay for a long, expensive trial, so we should settle it. And when we walked out, there was no settlement, no meeting of the minds. It was just over, as the judge dismissed the case without any settlement agreement, any agreement at all. So it just ended one day before we were actually going to trial. My son's interpretation of it, and as we talked, he was flabbergasted. I was, my daughter, we were all litigants in this case because a perpetrator sued us for defamation, and that's a common tactic as well, to always try to maintain control over the abuser. Over the survivor.
Yeah.
And so I went to all the depositions. I was present at everything. So I walked through the entire court system, and what I thought was bad is actually horrible. And the lack of control of the survivor is outlandish at best. I think my son psychologically did very well. I think the court system, and knowing that he was going to tell his story, kept him going forward, kept him in therapy. And at the time that we got dismissed, or just, I'll call it kicked out of court, he was prepared. He was prepared to face his perpetrator, who just never got a chance. So he really never got a chance to tell his truth.
It's, you know, it's almost leaves me speechless. But I'm so thrilled you're going to do a documentary about that. People need to be educated. People need to be informed. People need to know how to prepare. But how devastating that it would just be dismissed and then the perpetrator suing you for defamation. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So it seems to me in the research or in the documentary that you found a police department that kind of has a more stellar looking way of dealing with it, and where was that?
It was in Ashland, Oregon. We searched the country for different police departments that were trying to get it right, and we came across Ashland, Oregon, and they had a You Have Options program, and it seemed to have all the right components to it that would make it survivor friendly. And you could do a partial reporting, you could do a full reporting, you could call the police department or go online and say, hey, this person abused me. I don't want to do anything right now, but I want to let you know. Perhaps, you know, we know that a lot of perpetrators, there are multiple victims, and this allows someone to report. And if they start seeing the same name over and over again, then they can follow that person. They could, you know, use other survivors to support each other. So there's so many different ways that program could work. And I think for someone that's new and they just want to tell someone whether the statutes have run out or not, then that's a perfect way to do it.
And is that program being taught anywhere else?
It is, and there are several police departments that have picked it up. It doesn't cost a lot, according to Carrie Hall, who's the detective that runs it. She's gotten grants. She trains officers. She trains police departments. It comes down to funding and how much police departments really, really want to pursue these crimes. They're difficult to prove.
Yeah. So, you know, we have 4 or 5 minutes left. I want to give each of you a chance to say whatever it is that you think is really important for us to know. And I'll start with you, Neil.
Thanks, Natasha. I think one point for your viewers to know is that statutes of limitations are particularly difficult for survivors, and those are the laws that set time limits for filing legal claims. Because survivors are victimized as children and it takes time for them to process and mature and recover memories, often the statutes run before they're able to file legal claims. In New Jersey in particular, although there's no statute of limitations for sexual assault, there are statutes for lesser sexual crimes against children. And there's also a statute of limitation in civil claims against children, involving abuse of children. I know there's been a strong movement in New Jersey to change and eliminate those statutes of limitations. So I would encourage your viewers to contact their representatives in the state legislatures to eliminate statutes of limitations, as other states have, in all child sex abuse cases.
I think that's really important, and you don't even have to be involved in any case or anyone in your family being a survivor. It just makes sense to do that.
Right. There's no statute of limitations for murder, and there should be none in child sex abuse cases.
Absolutely. Valerie,
yes.
What is it that you think is really most important for us to know?
I think most important thing to know is everyone is not a specialist in this area. And if you are going to go forward, you need to find an attorney that specializes in adult survivors of child sexual abuse. And it's not a personal injury lawyer, and it's not a lawyer that just does anything. It's someone who knows this and knows it well. And there aren't very many of those. And I found that out personally, that you need to have someone that truly knows what they're doing to handle these cases.
Yeah, and looking back on it, if you had it to do over again, what would you have done differently?
I would have demanded excellence. I know enough now to know that I did not have to accept what was given to me. And, you know, from the detective's perspective and from my legal team, I would have known enough that I didn't have to accept what was given to me. And I think you really have to be knowledgeable, or you have to go to someone and you recognize whether or not they know this area of law or not. And I just would never want anyone to end up the way we did. And, you know, my son had me because I'm not a survivor, but I'm a true advocate for my whole family and anyone else. But it was really difficult because I found myself being a lawyer, being a mother, being a litigant, being everything. And I didn't want to do that.
Wow. Yeah, and that's really powerful. And I think what you said is be a demand for excellence. And again, not be afraid to say, not you, and I can expect more, and I should expect more, particularly advocating for your child, you know? And I think sometimes people feel disempowered and they think they have to trust the authority. And someone with a sign on their door saying attorney at law is an authority, or the first detective they meet is an authority. Exactly. And really, I think what you said is probably key, is just be a demand for excellence, be unstoppable. So we're at the end of our time, and I just want to thank you so much, not only for coming on the show, but for the work that you're doing, for being such powerful advocates, and for not giving up. And, you know, we will show Pursuit of Truth on our station, and I invite people to watch, to take whatever steps they can take in whatever their situation is, even if it's only to make a call and say, hey, we need to change the law. So I look forward to your next documentary. Thank you so much again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Natasha.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.